everyone. I'm going to start sharing. My name is Ben, and I'm here to talk to you about static site generators. How many people know what static site generators are or have used them before? Ooh, well, I can't actually see people's hands the way I've... There we go. Yeah, I see some hands. Awesome. Well, I'm going to do a... Well, first me. I live in Urbana. I play the violin. I like playing board games. I'm a front-end developer. And I'm going to talk about static site generators, and I picked one in specific called Eleventy, and I'm going to show you how to make a website using it, and then we don't have a lot of people here, so hopefully we can just have a discussion on it. So we could say, we're going to try to define static site generators. To do that, I want to define static sites. So we could say that websites are either static or dynamic, but I don't want to quibble too much about the boundary and the edge cases. Instead, let me give some really far examples of maybe the two. So a static site could be like the very first site published on the internet. This is the site about the World Wide Web. It was created in 1990, and it hasn't changed in over 25 years. You can't get more static than that. There's no styling. It's just a bunch of links and text. And on the other side, we might have Facebook. This is the most dynamic website I can think of. It's so dynamic, it updates every minute, and it makes you want to check it all the time. And it matters who's looking at it for what content appears, and when you're looking at it too. And when we say static versus dynamic, I'm talking about the content of the website. So not if there's images or video. Video is actually a classic static content. Once someone like uploads an image to YouTube, or a video to YouTube, that video is not going to change. Dynamic content would be like the number of likes on that video. That changes as people click the button. So in a static website, like that old website I showed, there's the client who has the web browser, and files are being served by the web server. But most websites aren't like that. Most websites have a bunch of code, a bunch of backend code that is getting run, and databases that are storing information that the user can input to the website. So, for example, and a website doesn't have to be as complicated as Facebook. Just my WordPress blog is a dynamic site, even though there's not much going on, but it does have some PHP and WordPress installed and MySQL installed. And it can be a lot to deal with. I find that I have to constantly keep my WordPress site up to date. I have to install new versions of WordPress and back up my database and save it somewhere. So sometimes for something like a personal project, it can be a lot to have this big dynamic site, which is why static site generators have become more popular. It's a way to have some of the advantages of a static site, but sort of a hybrid solution where you're going to use some dynamic elements. And one important distinction to make is I just talked to you about static sites. Static site generators is a thing that generates a static site. So that's different than there's just a distinction between the technology that's going to build the site, and the output of that is going to be this static site generated site. And so this blog post by Tatiana and Mac, they do a really good job of introduction to this concept. So the way a static site generator works is this hybrid solution where you're going to do a lot of the things that traditionally would be done at runtime, but you're going to do them early. So Gatsby is a static site generator, and it could crawl my entire WordPress blog, which is really only like 12 blog posts, and bundle up all 12 pages, so pretending that it's someone visiting it. And that's actually the entire website, and it can put that on the web server. And that's nice because that means this web server doesn't need to have a database forever. And that means when someone visits the website, they sort of skip all of this heavy lifting. This has already happened. This might have happened on Saturday, and someone on Wednesday comes, and we've already created all the web pages that they need. It's sort of like caching the entire site. So we're going to generate the website using this static site generator, which is Gatsby. And the main important distinction is we're moving things that are traditionally done at runtime, like generating HTML. We're doing them earlier. We're doing them at build time. And this makes so it's a much faster for the load speed for the users. The build itself might be slow, but the users won't notice that. And it also is sort of considered scaling well, because I'm hosting my WordPress blog on like a Linux instance, and I'm paying some money per month, but it will crumble if 10 people visit it at the same time. But the static website is just a web server, and it actually ends up that there's much more services available for me, which Aaron will talk about later, these content delivery networks that can host static assets much easier. And it's also considered secure because my database isn't exposed. There's no way for the user to touch the database. And lastly, one of the reasons they're popular right now is the developer experience is considered really good, at least for front-end developers, because a lot of the things that were traditionally done is like back-end are kind of pushed to the front end. And we'll see that in a little bit. And if there are some cons, right now I've noticed that they're pretty confusing. I think that it's a new technology, so some of the usability bits are still a work in progress, and there's just so many ones to choose from. There's so many static site generators right now. And there are some limitations. So let me now do a tech demo. We're going to build a website using Eleventy, which is a JavaScript-based static site generator and calls itself the simpler static site generator. And people do seem to like it. So the website we're going to be building in Eleventy is going to be a website for my band. I'm in a jazz band, and we have a Facebook page, but it would be nice to have something more. And really, I just want to get more gigs. So I want some contact information and pictures. I want a way to listen to us and a list of upcoming shows. So in this demo, I'm going to show you how to make pages and layouts, host images, and then I'll show you how Eleventy does components and how it does API requests. So let's try this out. You see my VS Code here? Great. Okay, so we have an empty directory, and because it's in JavaScript, we use npm, which is half the reason why I chose to use this, and we're going to install Eleventy. And the first thing, and really the main thing I'm trying to convince you of, is that the way static site generators work is you're going to create some markup, and that's going to turn into a website. So this markup file just says hello world, and when I run the command Eleventy, is this big enough, this terminal down here? Is the thumbs up mean bigger or good? Okay, it sounds good. So 11,
no, it means good.
So we're going to run it, and instead of writing to site.index from index.markdown. So it took my markdown and it put it in this build directory. Hey, great. And then we can use Eleventy serve to check it out at localhost. Hello world. So yeah, it feels very like we're back in the 1990s. But that's a little bit of the point, is this is sort of maybe a realization that making just a simple website can involve 1,000 technologies. And people, I think, eventually were like, maybe we need to go a little backwards and make things a little simpler. So if I want to make another page, it's not like I have to open up a database and make a new blog entry. I could make a contact page by making a contact.markdown. And I save that, and it'll automatically write it out to a contact page. So let's check out /contact. Does it exist? It does. So let me explain how layouts work in Eleventy. So some things you might want to be reused, and you don't want them to automatically get transformed into a new page. So you can have a folder called includes, and it ignores everything with this underscore under it. And I'm just going to copy in a basic layout, my basic layout. And really, I did this, in fact, it's not going to be in Markdown. It's going to be in a templating language called Nunjux, but you can use a lot of different templating languages. And really, I just wanted a nav bar. I want to reuse this nav bar. And it also has some other HTML in here. And then in this file, you put front matter, which is meta information at the top of the file. So I'm going to say layout, my basic layout. Hey, now I have that nav bar, and I can use that same nav bar somewhere else, so I don't have to. So I can just update the nav bar when I need to in one place. And now we want some images. So I'm gonna make a folder for that. And I have some images right here of our band. I'm gonna just copy these images into that folder. And here, let me get my contact page a little fancier now. So we got some more markdown showing how to do links. And we got an image here. Oh, and it didn't quite work. Well, that's because you do have to tell Eleventy if you're doing some different formats what it actually should copy over. So it says say formats, and I want markdown and some JPEGs and also these nunjucks files. So now it said it copied 5 files and it also wrote a couple files. Hey, there's an image right there. So hopefully that explains a little bit of the idea that we're going to, in our source control, we're going to commit a bunch of information about how the site wants to be built, and it's going to get turned into the static site. Because this entire build directory, that's what I would put on the actual server where I'm hosting the site. So now I'm going to just skip to the finished product and show a couple of other things that Eleventy can do. So here is so first, because that seems great, but kind of boring. I can, it's a new way to define websites. The advantage is I can do a couple things that normally I would require a backend for, but I'm going to take advantage of other people's backends, essentially. So for instance, I want to display all my upcoming events. And those are on Facebook. That's normally where they are. But when people come to me and they're like, where can I check you out? I tell them Facebook. A lot of times they're like, I don't use Facebook. So Facebook, well, they have an API. So Facebook API. So I need to make a new access token real quick. So log in with my Facebook page and copy that. And this is the endpoint I want to hit. Hot Club of Urbana/events gives me a list of all the events. And then I've already made this. I'm going to have 2 files to accomplish this. One is going to just be a template file that's going to loop through the events in Facebook data and display some information about them. The other one I'm going to put in this data file, and it's a JavaScript file. And it is going to actually make the API call to Facebook. So let me paste this new, ooh, there's this new access token. So, well, that seems like the same one. Well, okay, we'll see if it works. Access token. Okay, so now let's run this. Okay, so we can see when it actually made an asynchronous call when it generated the website. So this took it almost a second, but that's okay. We're doing this at build time. This only has to happen once. So when someone, I forgot, I need to add some links to this. I called it events. When the user visits the site, they're just going to get this and it's going to be quite fast. We've already talked to Facebook. We did it when we built the website. And this is nice because I'm basically relying on this Facebook and their army of engineers to be my content management system. When I want to make a new event, I update it there. So another example could be I want people to listen to our band. And I don't have any like amazing recordings, but people have recorded us on YouTube before. If you search Hot Club of Urbana, like we do come up. And so I can embed some of those sites, So here's my listen page. And likewise, I can just do a loop right here. And to do this, I've made a component. So that's what I really wanted to explain. How does Eleventy do components? You can make some JavaScript that returns some HTML. So here I've made a component in video.js, and it's like a React component almost. It takes some variables like a title, an ID, and what timestamp to start the video, and it just loads an iframe, and it uses those variables to decide what we're loading. And that's nice because then later in here, in my data, I have YouTube data, and I have a list of all of the hand-curated picked videos that I think showcase or band the best. And in this listen file, I'm just going to loop through them. So let's make sure I have a link to it. Great. And that's only possible because YouTube, they have a nice way, you know, they have this nice share button here that includes that way to share your things. So I'm really just copied this. And the only reason to turn it into a component was to make the data a little easier for me to manage, because I don't have like a nice content management system, but at least all I have to do is go in and change this JSON data file, and it'll change what videos I'm showing. So here's our little website. So let me go, oh, not stop share. I want to just go back to my PowerPoint. Seem to have closed it, but that's okay. Let's find it again. But really, I'm nearing the end of my demo. I think I just had a couple of final thoughts that I thought were things were important in what I learned. Mainly that it happens at build time. It's really easy to, I think, forget that. But everything, the main trick is like, what can you do at build time and what can't you do? For instance, in my contact form, I at first imagined like a form where someone could submit a message to us. Like, I'm interested in your band. But that's actually kind of hard in a static site. I don't have a backend or a mail server to accept that form submission. But that's okay. I decided, you know what? I don't want to deal with a mail server. I'm just going to link them to our Gmail account, and they can message us there, or our Facebook account. And so that kind of comes to, I think, the important thing that people are really liking about static site generators is you utilize the resources of other dynamic sites to make powerful static sites. So you can use a lot of APIs, basically. So the power of static sites is not like, yay, you can make your entire site in Markdown, but programmers do love Markdown. The power is that you can use API requests. And so there's something coined the Jamstack, which is JavaScript, APIs, and Markdown. Not all static site generators might be the Jamstack, but when people are talking about the Jamstack, they mean static site generators. And they mean using a lot of JavaScript, a lot of APIs, and then some Markdown to define your website. And finally, the possibilities of static sites keep on expanding. So a lot of things that used to not be possible to do with a static site are becoming possible. So and a lot of that has to do with content delivery networks, which Aaron will talk about next. So for example, like redirection. Well, that used to be hard to do on a static site, but now there's ways to do redirection. And also authentication. That's like a classic, how do you authenticate someone with a static site? But they're figuring out ways to do simple token authentication. So yeah, it's super interesting technology, and does anyone have any questions for me?
Ben, what made you choose, like, I know that there's a bunch of static site generators out there. Are there any other notable static site generators that you found, or like, why did you choose Eleventy over any of those? Like,
Yeah. So the real big one is called Gatsby.js. And maybe the big reason it's big is it got like millions of dollars in venture capital funding. But also you have to use React when you use Gatsby. So it's a little more heavyweight, and it's more about like, there's a lot of plugins. So if you wanted like a way to crawl your WordPress blog and turn it into a static site, Gatsby would probably have a plugin for that. So that's sort of like that big heavyweight one. Also, I think if you're trying to find a static site generator, there's so many of them. I think it's correct to just choose one in a language you're comfortable with, because there's Hugo that uses Go, there's Jekyll that uses Ruby. There's enough out there that I think that's a good way of dealing with the choice overload. Like, find one that you like the language. The other thing to mention is there's a lot that sort of merge what responsibilities a static site generator has, because they interface very heavily with these content delivery networks. So like, I don't know, there's one called redwood.js that is like, we're a full stack static site generator. It's like, what does that mean? It kind of just means that they handpicked what technologies you're going to use, and it's not as agnostic. But that's actually kind of nice because there's too many to choose from. Any other questions?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask if you mentioned that your site is WordPress. Have you messed around with kind of the like headless WordPress stuff at all, or not personally?
Yeah, not really yet, but I kind of want to, because it's such a pain dealing with WordPress themes and plugins. There's all these things where you're like, oh, I found one that there is a class called comment, and that's the same class for people leaving comments on my blog, and also when I post code with comments in it, they get syntax highlighted like that. And so I just can't figure out oh, I guess they're just the same class, and I don't have good access to changing the plugin for syntax highlighting compared to base WordPress, and it's really obtuse. So I'd love to just redo the entire front end, because part of the idea of a static site generator is definitely decoupling your data from the front end. So one of the advantages of using like WordPress just as a CMS and then consume it is because WordPress is great at being a CMS, but you don't have to deal with the theming options. So yeah, I might. And also that reminds me, I think it's a lot easier to redo your front end than change your data. I probably would never be able to convert my blog into Markdown because it lives in like WordPress land. And it would just be so hard to be like, okay, let's pull it out of the database. What looks wrong? What looks right? So it's basically stuck there. But I could, if I wanted to redo my blog, use a generator and change the front end and how it looks. That actually could be possible.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
I'm kind of curious. Could you take like in something like Eleventy, would you be able to say take a rendered version of your WordPress blog and then just like include that as posts?
Yeah, I mean, so WordPress has an API, but it's a good question because a lot of my WordPress blogs are like using Gutenberg blocks, which are like a little weird. So I do think it would come down rendered, basically. But that's okay. But it might make it harder to style. I'm like, great, well, here's all the weird classes already that I wanted to get rid of. So yeah, that's a good question.
Does Eleventy, does it have to run from your local machine, or can you hook it up to a Git repository?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. One of the main reasons to use these static site generators is to have an automated build process and have that happen somewhere else. So a lot of these like content delivery network solutions will have ways that like a hook where as soon as you push to your repo, it like does a build and it deploys it across all these CDNs. And that's sort of part of the good developer experience, I think, is like being able to trigger this build. I even saw you can trigger builds with if this then that. So you can be like, that's one way to be like, I want to nightly run this build, but I want to host a machine with a cron job. So I'll just use if this then that to be my cron job.
Cool. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, thank you
so
very
much for
much.
listening. It was really fun to give the talk.
Thank you, Ben. If we could all give just so good. All right. So again, yep. Thanks very much, Ben. That was a great talk. Static site generators is like a really rich vein of topics, and if folks on this chat haven't used them, like they're interesting. I've used a few different ones, and they're all, I don't know, they're all unique. They're all different. So normally at this point we would take a little break, and I would say, guys, go get another piece of pizza and another drink. But I think that we're really just we might just push forward here.